G'day friends, in this video I am giving a keynote at a recent conference in Sri Lanka. So I traveled to Sri Lanka a couple of months ago now at the time of recording and gave a keynote about why we are living in the golden age of solopreneurship and one-person businesses. So I tell the story of my grandmother, I go through some facts and figures about the trends, the technology, the change in the world and how we're working, and why one-person business and solopreneurship is going to be the future of work. So this conference is the Confederation of Asia Pacific Chambers of Commerce and Industry. So it's a Chambers of Commerce event for Chambers of Commerce across the Asia Pacific. So there are 27 countries represented in this network. At the conference itself, there are about 500 people, not always in the room, but spread across the 2 days. This was, as I mentioned, a conference in Sri Lanka for 2 days. I was invited to speak on the future of work, solopreneurship, and one-person business. I talk about different technologies that are impacting the size and operations of businesses in the modern day, and how also it's empowering individuals to start their own business. So enjoy the presentation, and I'll see you in the next part for the Q&A.
So our next speaker, Mr. Michael Lin. Okay, please, Michael.
Thank you, Dennis, and to my other panelists. They've officially saved the worst for last, so the quality that you've just seen is just about to go down a hill with my presentation here. But I wanted to start with a story of my grandmother. So my 87-year-old grandmother ruined my life. This is a photo of her here, of us enjoying some durians in Singapore, and she would absolutely kill me if she knew that I used this photo at an international conference. But she's not here, and you're not going to tell her. So a little bit about myself is that I was born in Singapore, and I was raised in Australia. So for the first 5 years of my life, I was born in Singapore, raised there with my grandmother, and then for the last 25 years or so, so you do the math of how old I am, I was raised in Australia. And the reason why was that my grandmother, Nancy Ong, was the first entrepreneur that I ever knew. And she owned a flower store for the Singaporeans here in Mei Ling Street. So it's a very small flower store. And for those who haven't been to Singapore, it is a nation of hawkers, of independent owner-operators selling either flowers or food. And they're going through a bit of a transition at the moment. But in her generation, she made a very good living, enough to raise 5 children, including my father. And I worked in this store for about $5 a day. I was 7 years old, visiting from Australia, and the child labor laws at that time were very different. But her business at the time was limited by her geography, the inventory that she could store, and the local market size that she had. This early entrepreneurship experience with my grandmother ruined my life, like I said. I grew up now wanting to own my own business and experience the freedom, the autonomy, and the ability to control the workload, but also how much I worked and how much I got paid, just like my grandmother did. But I wanted to do it differently. So the argument that I have for this presentation is that we are living in the solopreneur revolution, which is solo plus entrepreneurship. Solopreneur, didn't coin it, but I'll take credit for it. And I'm arguing that individuals today have more power than a 10, 20, 30-person company did a generation ago. Startups related to digital innovation are getting smaller and more powerful across the world. So this is a graph of businesses in the S&P 500 doing more with less. So as you can see, since the late 80s, the number of employees required to actually make $1 million in revenue has steadily declined. So much so that we're living in a generation where in 2020 and beyond, you only need 1, maybe 2 employees to generate more than $1 million in revenue. And this is scaling more over time. So recently, this is an article published on July 23rd, 2025. Lovable, which is an AI building app where you hit it with a prompt and it'll develop a website for you, reached a valuation of $100 million and is chasing a $1 billion valuation in 18 months of being founded. So there are less people in this startup making more money than ever and creating more impact than ever. To put this in perspective, Lovable is now the fastest valued company in the world, and it's ahead of companies like Shopify, Twilio, Slack, OpenAI that we've mentioned before. So companies are starting, they're becoming more powerful and hitting more leverage than ever before and having higher and higher valuations with less and less employees. But why? Can anyone tell me why? AI. So one of the things is leverage. So with AI, we're obviously getting an incredible amount of leverage. But what is the definition of leverage? So a lot of people say that they're putting leverage into their business, but for me, leverage is more output per unit of input. And there are, for the business owners here, how much effort would it take to reach and engage 10,000 leads? Well, back in my grandmother's day, when she owned the flower store, that would have been impossible for her to reach that many people, let alone sell to that many people. But as I said, I wanted to start a business just like my grandmother, but I wanted to do it differently. So I started leveraging the internet to do so. So not to flex, but this is my medium.com profile, which is an online blogging platform. And I've been writing online for about 6 years. And over that time, I've gathered an audience of about 91,000 followers. So the ability to reach people all across the world nowadays for a sole individual using my laptop, working from anywhere in the world, has never been easier using the power of leverage. And these are some of the articles that I've written about solopreneurship and the one-person business model. And you can see the views there with how many people are, number one, viewing it and also reading it. So there are over 100,000 views on these 3 articles alone, and with over 100,000 reads as well. So the number of people that I'm able to reach and engage and draw into my business is getting easier and easier with more leverage that I'm applying. So the 3 mega trends that I've mentioned are the internet. So we have the ability to connect with anyone all over the world using number 2, which is the mega trend of social media. So the ability to portray your own personal profile and avatar online has never been easier. And lastly, what the gentleman said with artificial intelligence, where we now have the ability to scale labor and intelligence that's detached from humans. And these technologies are only advancing. My argument here is that tech doesn't destroy value, but rather shifts it. So we are now going through a shift of how value is being created, and it's being created less and less by more humans, but the prosperity that it creates can be shared by more and more people. And one quote that lives rent-free in my head at the moment is with Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI. He mentioned in early 2024 that in a little WhatsApp group chat with his tech CEO friends, there's a betting pool for the first year that there is a one-person billion-dollar company, which would have been imaginable without AI, and now will happen. So, going back to my argument of startups, they're becoming smaller, they're becoming more powerful, and they're becoming globally mobile. They are no longer anchored to a particular place or a particular ecosystem for them to survive. And the second part of my argument is that Asia is the hotbed for these modern forms of startups. And the reason being is that about 18 months ago, I left my safe, comfortable home of Melbourne and went on a journey across Southeast Asia and the Asia Pacific, traveling to many, many different countries. I left behind a very safe job, a brand new house that I built, and started traveling all across Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Japan. And the things that I found is that the entrepreneurs in these spaces are connected. In one of the earlier panels that we heard today, she mentioned that the world is fragmented across Asia Pacific, and that is definitely true, maybe across a policy and an institutional level. But for many of the young entrepreneurs, and I work with many of them through the Young Entrepreneurs Group of Asia Pacific, shout out to the group in the back, and also the Australian Young Entrepreneurs Group, we are more connected across borders than ever. The ability to communicate with each other, to collaborate, and to share what is happening in each other's countries has never been easier before. There are also market drivers for Asia being a young population with a rising middle class and government policy that is progressive and being made with industry, which is not the same that's happening across Australia. A recent report by the OECD on Startup Asia found that Asia is home to the second largest startup scene globally, accounting for around 23% of all venture capital investments from 2021 to 2023. Another policy paper, white paper, focusing on ASEAN is looking at innovation and entrepreneurship has identified as catalytic drivers of inclusive and sustainable economic growth. Thank you. Got 30 more seconds. I've been powering through this. So to go back to the question that Dennis posed to all of us at the start of this panel was, how do we enhance cross-border cooperation in digital innovation and startups? One of the challenges I have with having a startup that is now moving across many different countries is getting visas. So the country that is able to have favorable visas for startup founders are going to find more and more of them there. And while more of these startup founders are sole or individual founders, we want to be still creating a community. One of the things that I'm really proud of alongside my co-founders, Stu Thompson and Peter McMullen, is that we are bringing together young entrepreneurs from right across the Asia Pacific to be able to find the people that are doing good and also making money and also building a global ecosystem. So I'll end with this quote, which is by one of my favorite authors, Parag Khanna, in his book, The Future is Asian, which is, in the 19th century, the world was Europeanized. In the 20th century, it was Americanized. And now in the 21st century, the world is being irreversibly Asianized, linking 5 billion people through trade, finance, and infrastructure networks that together represent 40% of global GDP. We are the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. You're finishing on time. I think Michael just showed us a very good example about the creativity and the innovation about startups.
One of the big questions that I got after I gave that presentation is what's going to happen to community? And I was running out of time in that particular speech, but what I wanted to end with is that when there are more solopreneurs in the world and more people are working for themselves and the size of businesses are getting smaller and smaller, the value and rarity of a close-knit community for solopreneurs is going to become more valuable at the same time that it becomes scarce. When everyone is working as a solopreneur, you don't necessarily have a manager, you don't necessarily have colleagues, but you do have the responsibility and you do have the freedom to create your community. And one of the things that I wanted to really emphasize in this speech, but I didn't really get time to, is that when you're a solopreneur, it doesn't mean that you're doing everything alone. That's one of the misnomers around having solopreneur in front of entrepreneur. It does not mean you're doing everything alone. You still have a team of subcontractors potentially. You might have a virtual assistant, but more importantly, you're able to design the people and the community around you in a way that aligns with your goals, which is very different to working in a corporate environment where you're often given a manager, you're given colleagues, you're given a corporate structure, you're given a title, and there's not much freedom nor responsibility to choose. And with solopreneurship, this is going to be flipped on its head, which is you're going to have to take even more responsibility. Freedom is not about no responsibility. It's about taking even more responsibility for your life, for your work, for the community and the people that you surround yourself with. So a lot of people said, what's going to happen if we don't have people around us? Well, humans need connection. So whoever can start thinking about creating community and surrounding themselves with the right people, that in itself is going to be such a valuable service, such a valuable thing you can sell to others, which just has a curator, just has a conductor, bringing other solopreneurs together into a community. That's going to be one of the big services. The next $1 million business is in-person solopreneur communities all around the world, whether that's Bali, whether that's Portugal, whether it's in another solopreneur digital nomad hotspot. That's where the next business opportunity is going to end up. The last thing that I ended this Q&A with is talking about the global ecosystem and what's going to happen to community. And I took a more broader approach rather than individual and started to look at different countries who were positioning themselves for the solopreneur revolution. So currently it's pretty tricky at the moment because you have to sort out your own business incorporation, your own tax residency, your domicile, and then your visa. Now, many countries such as Thailand, even Vietnam, Indonesia, even Malaysia now, are looking at these visas that attract these digital nomads, these solopreneurs, these remote workers into their countries. And I think it's only a matter of time before we get a regional approach. So maybe Southeast Asia or ASEAN starts looking at solopreneurs as people that they actually want to bring into their global community, because one, they're going to be spending their money in the country, they're going to be paying for things, they're going to be paying for rent, they're going to be paying for food, and they're going to be bringing in foreign money into the country without actually taking any jobs from locals. In fact, they're going to be creating jobs for locals. And look, we can argue all day whether that's right or wrong, but that is the trend that's going to happen. And many countries are already taking up this opportunity in the global changing economic order. Thailand has a 5-year visa that you can buy for a couple $100 for remote workers. And I think more and more countries are going to be tailoring themselves to attract this global talent almost as a form of foreign direct investment into their countries, with really great tax incentives, with visas, and really great living and lifestyle conditions. So enjoy the next video where I talk more about the global
Thanks,
community.
Dennis. I think the last thing that I wanted to end with was touching on the global ecosystem. So in my context, I have a business incorporated in Australia, but I want to move that business to Singapore. I want to shift my tax residency away from Australia and move it to a different country, but then I also want to live in Bali. So more and more young entrepreneurs, startup founders, they are borderless. They are having their business in another country, living in one, but doing business across the world. But the global ecosystem and community has not caught up to that, and countries are losing out on the ability to retain that talent across the world. So I'm not arguing for a global revolution, but there is more coordination required, especially around the ASEAN countries who are attracting these young startup founders, and how can you retain them with visas, with tax implications, and also allowing them to stay in the country long term.
So the next segment of the CACCI conference is the second panel that I actually joined alongside my good friends Hiromi Yaoki, Kulan David Deutsch, and Katarina. And it was a great panel because we all got to speak about our individual experiences and also what brought us to this entrepreneurship journey. A lot of people don't know the reasons why I left Australia and why I wanted to travel across Southeast Asia and use Bali and Singapore in particular as my base, and why I'm going back to the country and the region that my parents fought so hard and sacrificed so much to leave and establish our lives in Australia. So this provides a lot of the context behind my own journey, why I care so much about community, why things like Solopreneur launch, things like the Young Entrepreneurs Group of Asia Pacific, which I'm a part of, are so important to my journey and to other people around the region. We all come from very diverse backgrounds. We've all either studied or lived overseas. So here's a bit more about my journey, my upbringing in Melbourne, and ultimately what led me to leave Australia and go to Southeast Asia. And this is often not a story that many people know. So I'm glad that I got to share it on this stage. And for some context, this is like one of the last sessions of the day. So the room really cleared out after this one, but I didn't really mind about how many people were in the room. I'm glad that I actually got to tell my story alongside some incredible entrepreneurs and people that I really admire, and got to tell my story to people who still stayed in the room and really enjoyed it. So here's a little bit more about my story.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Lim, and as I mentioned before in my presentation earlier today, I was born in Singapore and raised there till about the age of 5, and then moved to Melbourne, Australia, and have lived there for the past 25 years. And for those who haven't lived in Australia for a very long time, it is a beautiful place, don't get me wrong, but it is a place that still struggles somewhat with racism. And for a long time when I grew up, going through high school, primary school, I was one of the only few Asian kids in my school. And I dealt with racism from other parents, from other students, and even my teachers. So for a very long time, I felt too Asian to be Australian, and also then when I went back to Singapore, too Australian with this accent to be Singaporean. They would never accept me talking the way I talk. And for a very long time, I thought that was a liability, a weakness that I had. And I would either try to hide my Asianness or hide my Australianness, depending on the context. But the reason why I'm so passionate about groups like YGAP, the Young Entrepreneurs Group of Asia Pacific, is because we have very diverse lived experiences, either growing up in foreign countries and bringing that knowledge back to where we were born. And that is a journey that I've gone on myself, leaving Australia about 18 months ago, traveling around Southeast Asia for the last 18 months and really reconnecting with those roots. And now the mission that I have is not so much to try and fit in between two different places or be stuck in this third place, but in fact, I can use these experiences to be a bridge between Australia, Southeast Asia, and Asia Pacific. So that's what I find drives me, and also why I see entrepreneurship as this vehicle to be able to build a bridge between Australia and Asia Pacific, but across ASEAN and the Asia Pacific as well. So thank you, and I'm really excited to be part of this great panel.
So you heard about the story of me wanting to leave Australia and some of the experiences that I've had quite recently that have shaped my business journey, and why I place so much emphasis on finding a community, surrounding yourself with the right people in order to not only grow your business, but to grow yourself. One of the things that I always remind myself is that a pot plant will never outgrow the environment that it's in. So if it's in a small pot, it's going to think in a small way. You put a plant in a bigger pot and it's going to grow to the size of the pot. So where you put yourself, where you root yourself, where you choose to grow, you'll never exceed your environment. That is just a fundamental truth of life. You'll just never exceed the environment you put yourself in. So you put yourself around small people, you'll stay small. If you put yourself around big people, you will grow bigger. So that was a lot of the journey that I went on across the last 18 months to really find that community and this group of people that I can grow with. And the next question that Hiromi asked me was really around my early experiences growing up. And a lot of people assume, for whatever reason, that I come from quite a privileged background, and that I had a lot of things just either handed to me or given to me, and my parents are quite wealthy. That is not the case at all. And I actually grew up in a very poor, dangerous part of Melbourne's west in Victoria. And it's one of the most disadvantaged areas across Victoria, across the state of Victoria. And that's where I grew up. And that's actually where I still have attachments. All my family, all my friends went to school there, were in the area for most of our lives. And for a kid in Melbourne's West to be doing what I'm doing now, it just beats all odds and all statistics and all the programming and the narrative that society was giving me at that time. So the next video goes more and more into my story in the past, and I actually got quite emotional talking about it because of how much it shaped me and how much I know that these early experiences of growing up in hardship, of growing up in places where people were scared to visit, and whenever I went to university and I told them where I was from, people either associated that place with drugs or crime, and they still do very much. So this is a lot about my upbringing and how growing up in a humble setting has really shaped me in various ways and gave me such a strong work ethic and a purpose behind what I do. So this is more about my story coming up next.
And each of you has achieved, significant milestones in their own stories. So I would love to hear personal stories. What you have accomplished, what you have faced in your, the challenges you faced, and what made you happiest or most proud on your journey.
I grew up in a part of Melbourne that was considered very disadvantaged. So Melbourne's West is one of the most socioeconomically disadvantaged areas in all of Victoria. And the actual suburb that I grew up in is ranked the second most disadvantaged suburb across Victoria, Melbourne Metropolitan specifically. So a very famous politician once said in Australia that your postcode determines your outcomes. And that is more and more true in the world that we're living in, that the postcode and where someone lives is determining the outcomes they can achieve in life. So coming from an area of Melbourne that is highly disadvantaged, and from parents who only have a year 9 education and worked entry-level blue-collar jobs for their whole life, I'm very proud that I have been able to take those experiences, honor that tradition of the hard work that my parents had of moving from one country to another country, raising 3 unruly boys in a country where they had no social support, and doing it very well. And I'm really proud that I, alongside all the business success and whatever successes that I have, I am most proud of the relationship that I share with my parents to this day, and that the values and the life philosophy and the life mission that they've embedded me with is something that drives me every single day. And that's something that I don't think that's something to me I don't ever want to lose. And I think if I lost that, but got a lot of business success, to me, at the end of the day, it would still be a failure.
One core component of my story that I didn't get to capture in that question was actually my educational journey. So up until basically 16 years old, I was not doing very well in high school. I was in and out of detention. I was in and out of being suspended. I got 2 lip piercings when I was 15 years old. And at the age of 16, I was actually placed in an alternative education program for disenfranchised and disengaged young men. Even though I went to a co-ed school, so there was boys and girls mixed together, we were separated away from the mainstream classrooms and the mainstream curriculum, and did an alternative form of education seeking to re-engage us back into mainstream education. So I did this program, and honestly, it was life-changing, still is life-changing. The teachers that I had at the time were mentors in many ways and really taught me how I can fall in love with education and learning and become the person that I am today. So again, I didn't really come from a very privileged background. I wasn't very good at school, and even going into my senior secondary education, I got below average for English in the States. So somehow I'm an online writer writing a book with hundreds of thousands of followers, and it's like I can't even get above average in English in high school. And I even got below the required entry score to get into my university. So I only got in because my school was actually listed as on a number of schools that the university recognizes suffering from disadvantage, basically, or experiencing disadvantage. So I was able to actually gain entry with a lower score and become a university student at Melbourne University. And that's basically the only way I got in. So there's not a, I was never high performing. I was never high achieving when I was younger. This kind of came in a much later part of my life. And I think it's those experiences that really taught me that I need to take my life seriously, and that no one is really going to give me anything. Like, there are opportunities like being able to go to a university with a lower score, but you're going to have to do the work to actually beat and even compete with these kids who have had private school education, who their parents are doctors and lawyers and barristers and investors. And for the longest time, I looked at my upbringing as a bit of a disadvantage, actually, going up against them, because I was like years behind them educationally, because they went to the best schools, got the best teachers, their parents are also very well educated, access to an enormous amount of resources that I just didn't have access to. But I honestly think that me having to fight for everything that I've had in my life, seeing my parents who are immigrants come to a new country, establish themselves, embrace an enormous amount of uncertainty, endure racism, endure discrimination, endure unemployment, endure everything that you possibly could as a child, seeing your parents struggle and struggle to make it, and they made it, more or less, and they raised 3 very great boys, to me and my 2 older brothers. And it's all those experiences that shaped me to be the person that I am today, and really helped me become the person who I am now, and why I work so hard in what I do. And it really dovetails into the next part of the question that talks about the journey that I went on across the last 18 months. The groups that I'm a part of, such as the Young Entrepreneurs Group, as well as me being a co-founder of the Good Business Network, we hosted a range of different activities and events across the year. So we did something in Osaka, we did something in Singapore, we did something in Malaysia, in Sri Lanka, in Melbourne. And this question really asked which one was a highlight and why. And ironically, despite going on this journey, it was actually the event in Melbourne that really felt like a full circle moment. And I went back home for the second time this year on why it was such an important milestone for me. So that's what I talk about in this next video, and why this journey and why going back to Melbourne was one of the most significant moments for my journey throughout 2025. So have a listen. Let me know what you think.
Okay, as you all know, we have carried so many activities during this year. And which moment or experiences stood out the most for you, and why? You have attended a lots of different kind of activities. Do you have any particular events that you want to share with?
I think one event that sticks out to me is the World Chambers Congress event that we had in Melbourne. And up until that point, I'd already been traveling for more than a year. And the reason why that event stood out so much to me, so it was in September, the 1st to the 4th of September this year, so really just 2 months ago. The reason why that stood out to me was it felt like a very full circle moment. So 3 years ago was actually when Hiromi and I were...
the first day that I met
yes,
in Melbourne.
we met each
Yeah, I
other in
remember
Melbourne.
that.
And we were also appointed to the Young Entrepreneurs Group of Asia Pacific in Melbourne 3 years ago. So that was in 2022 at the CACCI conference held in Melbourne. So now 3 years later, Hiromi is now the chair. I'm one of the vice chairs. And together, alongside Peter McMullen AM, who's the president of CACCI, and Stuart Thompson, who is a vice president of CACCI, we were able to launch the Australian Young Entrepreneurs Group. And that felt like a very full circle moment because we had gone seemingly unintentionally on this journey starting in 2022. 3 years later, we're traveling and launching things in Osaka Castle together, many other places. And now this felt like a very full circle moment in Melbourne. 3 years, almost to the day since we met each other, and almost 3 years to the day that we were appointed into the Young Entrepreneurs Group of Asia Pacific. So that stood out in a memory for me. Despite Melbourne being my hometown, it was ironically the place that I think sticks out to me the most, despite all the travel that I've done. A close second, I think, would be launching the Good Business Network with the first Good Business gathering held in Osaka Castle. That was a lot of fun. The weather was amazing. And it was just great to be able to see and bring together, alongside my co-founders of Stu and Peter McMullen, the young entrepreneurs who are embracing the wrestle of doing good and making money. And these were not mutually exclusive principles or values for how they built their company. And I think that really encapsulated the whole journey that we've been on with CACCI, with YGAP, and many other things that we've collaborated on. But that sticks as a core memory to me.
Shifting back to business, the panel took an interesting segue into some of the opportunities that we're seeing in the 21st century, but particularly in 2025 and beyond when it comes to businesses. And I think the trends that everyone talks about is obviously the technological trends, which is AI, automation, digitization, all that great stuff. And we all know that's happening. And there's enough people on the internet talking about the impact that AI is going to have on businesses. One of the things that I see, which most people don't talk about, is the impact of these small run traditional businesses that were established by a different generation, probably the baby boomer generation. So this is my parents' generation. They've grown it to a substantial size. This could be in the tens of millions or even $100 millions in revenue. And they are in manufacturing, they're in property development, they're in things that are not sexy necessarily, boring service-based business jobs, whether they're delivering a product or delivering a service to a clientele. So these businesses are by no means not profitable. They're very profitable, very well established, but we're at this critical junction where the older generation, these baby boomer entrepreneurs, are wanting to move on, whether they're retiring or unfortunately passing away. And the younger generation don't want to take these businesses up. A lot of trade roles and trade businesses are just closing. And in my context, in Singapore specifically, there is a growing trend of hawkers. So these are owner-operator stores that have a specialty in a dish and become very famous and do very well. But the children, because they are more educated, don't actually want to go into these businesses. They don't want to go into these dirty jobs necessarily and work very, very long hours. And so one of the biggest opportunities that I'm seeing with this happening is that we, as a younger generation of entrepreneurs, can apply the modern technology and the skill set and abilities and mindsets that we have to boring and older businesses necessarily to take them into the 21st century. And I think that is one of the most underrated opportunities, business opportunities that most people are just not seeing. So if you don't want to necessarily start your own business, you could just buy one or take over one. There are many ways you can finance a business. One of my friends recently bought a physio clinic, and this was for $0 down up front, and they would buy out over the next decade. So the owner was happy for them to take over, put up a nominal fee up front, and then over the number of years, if they hit a certain profit margin, which the owner promised that this is what the business was already doing, then they will pay them off with the profit used from the business. The reason why most owners or previous owners want to go for this model is because they have no other choice. it's either they sell it off with some sort of, innovative financing model, or the business closes altogether. So for them, it's like, well, if this is going to close, I might as well sell it off with a different finance model, and then over the next 5 to 10 years get paid out from that business. So there are many opportunities out there for how younger people can take over these more established, boring, but very profitable, very well run businesses and take them into the 21st century. And I go into this in more detail in this video here.
Okay, so this is often said to be the era of the younger generation in Asia, and particularly. And so many young people are driving economic growth. And in my own business, actually, succession journey, I faced many difficulties, like I mentioned in Melbourne. And what do you think is essential for young and senior generations to coexist, collaborate, and grow together?
One of the challenges whenever I visit Singapore is that, as I mentioned, Singapore is a nation of hawker centers. So these are independent owner-operator people who are selling flowers like my grandmother or food. And now there's a generational gap where these parents have built these very successful hawker stores. They're very well known for the ingredients they use, the way they cook, and there's a specialty that they've built for a particular dish. And now, because the younger generation are more educated and they want more white-collar jobs, there are many businesses that are just not having any of the talents or the labor that wants to take over the business. And this is not just happening at a hospitality, food level, but across many other businesses and many other industries. We are going through one of the greatest wealth transfers in the world, where the baby boomer generation is wanting to pass over this wealth onto the Gen X, Gen Z, and millennials. And there is no formal mechanism, way, or even precedent for how they actually do that. So what we need to have, I think, is a platform or a dialogue very, very similar to what we experienced on Sunday last night, where it was a group of young entrepreneurs and also entrepreneurs who have been around for longer. I'm not going to say older entrepreneurs, but just more experienced entrepreneurs sitting around the table and talking about the challenges that they have in their business and also the challenges that young people have. And often I think the opportunity to collaborate and have a conversation holds the seeds for what could be a foundation to have a platform and a mechanism for that wealth transfer.
The one question that I'm constantly asked when it comes to entrepreneurship and solopreneurship is, what skill set do I need to develop? What piece of knowledge do I need to have? But really, these are the wrong questions to be asking. When it comes to any form of solopreneurship or entrepreneurship, the most successful solopreneurs that I have ever met have had one trait in common, and that is obsession. They are utterly obsessed with solving the problem that they've chosen to solve, whether that's in health, whether that's in wealth, or whether that's in relationships. They are so obsessed with solving this problem, and generally speaking, it's a problem that they have personally experienced themselves. So what they're doing is they have created a business out of something that they themselves struggled with, maybe for years, maybe even for decades, maybe even for a whole lifetime. And they became obsessed with solving this problem because it impacted their life in such a fundamental way that it either held it back, and then when they solved this problem, it utterly transformed their life. And I was on a panel to give more context to what I speak about in the video with Kulan David Deutsch. So she is the founder and CEO of L'Amour Beauty, which is Mongolia's first ever organic skincare company. She has a story that is very inspiring, where she grew up in foreign countries and she was educated abroad, and she went back to Mongolia as an adult and started to struggle with her skin. Because of the pollution and debris in the air, she started to get flare-ups of psoriasis and eczema, and there was no solution for her in the market, so she started to develop her own solution. And she would literally mix organic materials like yak's milk and sea buckhorn weed. I don't exactly know what that is, but she does, obviously, in her kitchen to solve her own problems. So this is where I talk about being utterly obsessed with the problem that you're solving because you've experienced it for yourself. And most solopreneurs fail because they try to solve a problem that they've never experienced themselves. And you just won't have the same level of care. You won't have the same level of interest, passion, curiosity, but fundamentally you just won't have the same level of obsession. And obsession is what is going to keep you moving. It's going to keep you ahead of your competition. It's going to be the thing that gets you up in the morning when you just don't want to work on your business. It's going to be the thing that keeps improving your business when everyone tells you that this is not working. So obsession is the key. And I also have some pretty funny examples in there for you to laugh at. So enjoy the next video.
What do you think? When you get the father, what kind of father you want to be?
Well, I'll just say, I think on this panel, I'm the ugliest and the loneliest, it seems. No kids and no partner. But I think what I'll say in terms of entrepreneurship is obsession. I think everyone on this panel is obsessed, and they've built a business by solving their own problem. You know, L'Amour was obviously created with your own struggles of psoriasis and eczema. Your language school companies was created for when you were learning Japanese and studying. So, you know, we've all created businesses on things that we've been utterly obsessed with. So as an entrepreneur and your obsession with solving a problem that you've experienced firsthand for yourself means you don't really work because that's part of your life, but then you sometimes don't also have a life because you see both of them are so intertwined into one. And I think that's what makes entrepreneurs so different to other people. And the other way I would answer this is that, you know, life, like durians, is all about seasons. There are some seasons where durians are really ripe and delicious, and there are some seasons where they're really not. So with life, there are some seasons where you're going to be building and scaling a company, and there are other parts of seasons as an entrepreneur where you're going to be just maintaining and stabilizing your business.
So whenever I talk about obsession, people think that I'm working 24/7 or that you're not allowed to rest. And with obsession comes with the prerequisite that you have to be resting as much as possible. This is something, admittedly, that I struggle with. I am not the best at switching off. But what I've started to realize is that when I become the most obsessed, when I'm able to stay the most obsessed with what I'm doing, is when I actually give myself time to get bored, time to rest, and time to recover. So rest and being obsessed are not mutually antagonistic. If you look at the best sports athletes in the world, whether that's LeBron James, Cristiano Ronaldo, they are utterly obsessed with what they do, but they also take their rest and recovery to be just as important as their training and performance. They don't see it as a liability to getting things done. They see their rest and recovery as fundamental for them to keep going in their businesses. So this is where you need to balance obsession and rest together, and they come together. You can't be obsessed with something if you're not resting well enough, and you can't rest well enough if you're then not applying your obsession to something. The next question that Hiromi asked me was talking about if there was one skill that I could download immediately. This is a very interesting question. It's no surprise by the answer that I give, so enjoy this very short clip of the one skill I would download into my brain like an iPhone application if I could.
I think we are all stars from, you know, the region. I was just wondering if you could instantly download the one skill like a smartphone application, what would it be and why? One skill? Yes, one skill.
If I could download one skill
Yes,
instantly,
one skill.
it would be the ability to learn any language.
That's what I thought.
Like take your skill and then any language I could learn in like less than 24 hours, I would take that skill over and over again.
So for the last couple of months, I've been trying to become fluent in Bahasa Indonesian. So being based out in Bali, being able to speak another language is obviously very, very important, not only for integration into the local community, but showing respect for the culture that you're living in and the place that you're living in. But going through this experience of learning another language has really taught me the importance of communication, and not just communication in English or communication in Indonesian, but also how important it is to be able to communicate with a wide variety of people, regardless of country, regardless of race, and regardless of borders. So the reason why I would download this superpower of being able to learn any language within 24 hours is because of the doors it can open, because of the trust it can build, because of the rapport it can build, because of the growth that it could have for your business and for yourself personally. I grew up obviously being Chinese, Singaporean, and now Australian, but I could only speak English. I always felt that my worldview and my imagination was constrained by the language that I could use to describe it. And now being able to somewhat speak another language, that has really been able to open up my bandwidth of communication for being able to describe new experiences, even to tell jokes and express different sides of my personality that I didn't know that I had. So while it might not be around learning languages like Indonesian or English, it can be the language of business, and it can be the language of whatever domain or sector that you find yourself in. Speaking of the local ecosystem, the next question that Hiromi posed to me was some of the challenges, but also the opportunities for the future. And what I wanted to talk about as a region was Southeast Asia, or Asia Pacific specifically, but Southeast Asia, so the 11 ASEAN countries, they're going to be the hotbed for solopreneurship. Bali, Thailand, even Vietnam, these places are known, these cities are known, and these countries are known for attracting digital nomads and solopreneurs from all over the world, giving a fantastic lifestyle and being able to access the community and also have the visas to be able to stay there. But what's starting to happen is that the ecosystems in the countries are maturing, but they are yet to talk to each other in a regional way. So the development and the benefits of one country doesn't necessarily interface or interact with another country. So this is where the region could come together and have coordinated policies and also procedures, but also documentation that allows solopreneurs to access the region and not just specific countries. So visas are obviously a good example, and one that I bring up here in the next video around why visas can pose a really hard barrier to solopreneurs and digital nomads. When Thailand offers a 5-year visa for a couple hundred USD, Indonesia offers a different type of visa for a substantial amount of more money, and now Vietnam is also looking to attract these types of digital nomads and solopreneurs into the country. So I talked about how the region can respond to this growing trend of solopreneurship, how it can exploit and leverage the golden age of solopreneurship that we're seeing, where more and more people are going to be working for themselves and having an active choice into where they live, and they're not going to be stuck in Australia, they're not going to be stuck in the US, they're not going to be stuck in the UK, they're going to make active decisions, vote with their feet, and go to new countries. So this is how I talk about this playing out and what could happen as a region and what we could do to be more proactive about this trend and this future of work that I see happening across the world, and how ASEAN and Southeast Asia is going to be directly at the center of it. So enjoy.
I've been traveling quite extensively for the last 18 months. I mentioned this in the panel that I was on previously. One of the challenges that I have is wanting to have a business structure moved out of Australia, placed somewhere within Southeast Asia, obviously looking at Singapore and and Hong Kong, obviously for some tax benefits. But one of the challenges is being able to balance how I actually create this ecosystem. So I want to move my tax residency somewhere that isn't not Australia. I want to move my business structure either to Singapore or to Hong Kong. I want to move, but I want to live somewhere else in a place like Ho Chi Minh or Bali. And then I buy services to global memberships from many different countries. So for entrepreneurs, as Kulan mentioned before, the world is becoming borderless when it comes to business, and the world is becoming flatter as we keep progressing technology that enables entrepreneurs to go across the border. So there is an opportunity and an emerging space to not just help entrepreneurs get visas, because I know that's been mentioned a couple of times. I also mentioned it in my presentation. Visas are just one part of the equation of a much, much bigger ecosystem that an entrepreneur exists in that needs to be supported on. So visas is one, tax residency, domicile, as well as their legal structure. So how do they navigate a global ecosystem of different services they're purchasing, and how do they do this with a community that supports them? And I've been able to just cobble together a solution because I do have access to people in the Young Entrepreneurs Group Asia Pacific, because I do have people that are part of the Chamber of Commerce, people like you in the room, that are able to help an entrepreneur like this navigate the ecosystem and the landscape. But for many other entrepreneurs who are just starting out or maybe don't have those networks or those resources, this is a really challenging situation. And the country or the group of countries or the regional bloc that is able to be friendlier to entrepreneurs who are looking for this type of arrangement will ultimately capture most of the talent, entrepreneurial talent, that is coming out. So we're seeing places like Thailand offer, Destination Thailand visa, where it's a 5-year, essentially digital nomad visa. where you're able to live there for 5 years. Indonesia's got a very similar one for 2 years. Vietnam is coming out with a 10-year golden visa, I believe. These are all countries that are located maybe 1 or 2 hours away from each other, and potentially the visas don't really talk to each other, or the ecosystems don't really talk to each other. So really looking beyond just a country-wide ecosystem and looking at a regional block ecosystem would enhance the flow of entrepreneurs coming into the region and also retaining them into the ecosystem across the Asia Pacific.
So as I talk about the golden age of solopreneurship, and we talk about the ability to work remotely, the ability to have the freedom of time, location, and work, there are other opportunities that we are seeing in the world that are so underleveraged at the moment. So everyone is generally a consumer of social media, but they don't leverage social media as a creator to build their business. And writing online has been one of the most powerful, highest leverage things that I've ever done to build my business, build an audience, and attract opportunities to me. I've got an email list and a following and a range of digital products that all started from writing online and then building a business from that. And it took some time, but there is a way you can leverage social media to be able to build the network and the community around you if you don't have that around you right now. If you aren't born with the networks that your parents have or have cultivated, if you don't come from a family that is well known, the social media provides a platform that is democratic, that is meritocratic, and that you can get ahead with if you use it correctly. So one of the underutilized forms of leverage that we're all given right now is media. We all essentially have a broadcasting tool in our pockets called our iPhones, with a whole bunch of apps that allows us to connect to anyone in the world and find our 1,000 true fans who care more or just as much as the same thing we care about. I've been able to find people who love sales and marketing just as much as me, who love writing, who love books, who love creating content just as much as me. And by finding these people, you're able to build your community, build your networks, find your clients, find your dream customers, and work with them for the long term. And most people just don't see the opportunity of social media. They use it to numb themselves. They use it to distract themselves. They use it for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with actually building their business or improving their life. And look, you can do whatever you like in life. I'm not going to tell you how to spend your time or use social media, but if building a business is so important to you, if building a future for yourself is so important to you, you can repurpose the time that you already spend on social media to be more productive and build a business. So I talk about more about how you can do this, what are the tools for leverage, but also some of the things to be cautious about when you start creating things online.
In generally speaking, if you want to find out like a business partner in Singapore and living in Australia, if you don't belong to any kind of organization, how would you find out who is the business partner right for you?
I think I would leverage the power of social media as much as possible.
Social media.
If I didn't have any connections or mentors that could help facilitate that introduction, we do have this wonderful thing hosted by the internet called social media, which allows you to connect to many thought leaders and many different bodies. So I would leverage content, put content out there to try and solve the challenges that I have and attract the type of partners that I want to be building. For me, how I've done that is by writing online for a very long time. So I started writing online around 2019, so it's been about 6 years. And through that, I've been able to connect with people that I don't think I otherwise would have been connected to, and getting opportunities that I otherwise also wouldn't have been able to get access to. So I think for people who are starting, regardless of age, if you are facing a challenge, I think there is a wonderful thing called the internet. There's a wonderful thing called social media where you can leverage that to be able to access knowledge of the entire history of humans. And the average 12-year-old with an iPhone has more power and information and knowledge available to them than a US president probably 50 years ago. So the leverage available just to the average human being is incredible. So we live in a great time, and it's a very exciting time.
Actually, how do you guarantee, the credibility of the business partner? Is he like real or not? Yeah.
Well, I think that just comes down to context. So you've got to do your research and find out the context of the business, ask to interview some of the other customers. There is a level of due diligence that you'll have to do with working with any partner. So I think that approach of doing that in person and also doing that online doesn't really change. And I think there are ways, without going into too much detail, where you can have your own form of due diligence before you start working with someone. I really think it's no different to when you meet someone at a conference or you connect with someone on LinkedIn, how you then go about building that relationship. You know, I would never, when we first met in Melbourne, you know, I would never ask you to marry me at that point in time. But over 3 years, we built a relationship together, and now we're doing great things across Japan, and obviously here we are in Sri Lanka, and maybe I'll ask you to marry me tomorrow. But
All right,
that
thanks.
is the way to form relationships over the long term.
We are living at a time where the technology that is destroying the safety and security of 9-to-5 jobs is the very same technology that is making solopreneurship possible. So it's quite ironic that the same technology is destroying one thing and creating another. And this is the rule of technological advancement, which is when something else becomes abundant, another thing becomes scarce. And in the next video, I talk about the introduction of AI and how it was the fastest adoption of a technology to get to 100 million users in living history. It only took about less than 100 days, if I'm not wrong. So we are living at a time that through AI and through these large language models, there is no real advantage with information asymmetry anymore or data. Most things can be found online. And yes, there is proprietary data, and yes, there is proprietary information. But for the average solo 40-plus-year-old consultant and coach who is wanting to sell their finance, marketing, operational skills, you are no longer able to just sell information. You are needing to sell things like accountability, things like networks, and things like community. These are things that AI and large language models just can't give you. There is a clear limitation to what they can do, but they have made information and knowledge cheap and readily abundant for anyone to access. So technology doesn't destroy value, it just shifts it another place. So this is why I keep harping on about finding a community, building a network, investing in relationships, because this is the things that AI just cannot automate. And there's a really fantastic quote that I love from Jeff Bezos. He talks about people asking him, what's the new trend that's going to happen? What's the new thing they should be looking out for? The implicit question is, what's going to change about the future to be able to build a business on? And his answer was not necessarily what is going to change, but business owners and entrepreneurs should ask them, what is the thing that won't change in 10 months or 10 years from now? And for him at Amazon, people aren't going to want higher prices in 10 months or 10 years. They're not going to want slower delivery in 10 months or 10 years. So these are things that are not going to change. So what about human nature can you build your business on that is not going to change in 10 months or 10 years? And for me, social belonging, connection, identity, and community are things that human beings need to have. These are things that are part of our DNA. We can't turn them off whether AI or large language models tells us that we can. These are things that we fundamentally need to have to feel healthy and productive as human beings. So that's why I'm building my business on community, on networks and relationships, not just in Australia, but across Asia Pacific. That's what I'm so excited about in the future. And that's where the future of work is going to lie, in these communities, in these networks. When something becomes abundant, something else becomes scarce, and you want to build your business of something that is scarce in the world.
When we met in 2022,
Yep.
alongside that year, there was something else that was released into the world. Do you know what that is? It was ChatGPT. So in November 2022, roughly 3 years ago to the day, ChatGPT was released to the world. And it accumulated the fastest amount of users ever in history. So I believe it holds the record for getting to 100 million users ever. So we are living through one of the fastest and rapid technological adaptations in history with the introduction of AI, most famously through ChatGPT. So in this world that we have, information and knowledge is abundant and cheap. We can get it on our phones. You know, the many people looking at their phones right now, they're consuming knowledge from all over the world, maybe on ChatGPT or whatever AI platform they're using. So information is cheap and abundant. And as I mentioned before, technology doesn't destroy value, it shifts it. So value is shifting away from information and knowledge, which was once scarce at one point, to now the economy valuing in-person connection, community, and networks. So that's why I see places like the CACCI conferences where we are all gathering in person together. It's why I believe in the vision of the Good Business Network, where we're looking to connect entrepreneurs across the Asia Pacific who are looking to make money but also do good. and why networks like the Young Entrepreneurs Group Asia Pacific is going to be the DNA of every business. There is not an option to not have community. There's not an option to not have a network if you're building, scaling, growing, or starting a business. Because if you're getting all your advice or you're thinking all your advantages are information and knowledge, it takes one AI platform to automate all of that and also take your data and give it to other people. So information and knowledge are no longer business competitive advantages, but in-person networks, communities, like AGAP, like CACCI, like your local chamber networks, are going to be the thing that is going to separate the winners from the losers in this technologically enhanced environment.
Thank you everyone for watching this video. This brings an end to the Confederation of Asia Pacific speaking events that I did in 2025. And I'm going to try record more of these events that I speak at so I'm able to deliver this type of content to you. If you found it really interesting, please let me know. I'm experimenting with this content format and doing things a little bit differently. I also want to document as many of these experiences as possible on YouTube and other places. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below and I'll get back to you. Whenever you're ready to start your first one-person business, I have a range of resources in the description below. They start from free all the way to an investment option. So feel free to pick the option that works for you. Other than that, I'll see you in the next video. See you later.